I'm here to represent my department and to give a brief introduction of our department. On the very auspicious day of Mahanavami, may Durga bless us all on this occasion. Tomorrow is 2nd October, Mahatma Gandhi Jayanti. Tomorrow is also Dishera, it's a national festival, Asatya par Satya ki jeet ka pratik na. And most importantly, on 2nd October 2000, महात्मा गांधी मेडिकल कॉलेज का स्टोन लैंड स्टोन रखा गया था, तो इट्स एक्जैक्टली 25 ईयर्स विल बी टुमारो आज लास्ट डे है 25वें साल का, तो महात्मा गांधी मेडिकल कॉलेज की नींव रखी गई थी। और इसका इतना पुराना फोटोग्राफ जब डॉक्टर स्वर्णकार इसकी लैंड का इनॉग्रेशन कर रहे थे। एंड मोस्ट इम्पॉर्टेंट एंड मोस्ट प्रिविलेज इज दैट my joining in this department and in this medical college is on, and you can see it is 5th October 2000. तो 2 अक्टूबर 2000 को महात्मा गांधी शुरू हुआ था, तो 5 अक्टूबर को मेरे पास अपॉइंटमेंट मिला। तो इन दिस ऑडियंस आई थिंक आई एम द ओल्डेस्ट, एज डॉक्टर स्वर्णकार इज नॉट हियर, है ना। तो इस भीड़ के अंदर कम से कम इस सारे ऑडियंस के अंदर आई एम द ओल्डेस्ट। नाउ हेमंत मिश्रा बहुत आगे हैं शायद मेरे से। The department, this is our faculty, esteemed faculty, and most of the faculty members are more than 10 years old in our department also. Most of the unit heads are 10 years old. Department of General Surgery was established in 2000. Till date, more than 20 batches have passed out of their MBBS exam, BDS exam, physiotherapy students, and so more than 2000 MBBS students and 1000 other students have been taught by our Department of General Surgery. MS जनरल सर्जरी प्रोग्राम वाज स्टार्टेड इन 2010, तो उसके बाद से लगभग मोर देन 100 MS स्टूडेंट्स वर पास, तो 100 थीसिस वर रिटन, एंड कुछ ना कुछ सब लोगों से यहाँ पर जो है वो एकेडमिक क्वालिफिकेशन के अलावा भी बहुत सारी चीजें जो हैं यहाँ से सीख के गए और दे हैव टच विद अस। वी हैव ए वेरी ह्यूज डिपार्टमेंट। वी हैव 10 प्रोफेसर्स इन आवर डिपार्टमेंट, 3 एसोसिएट प्रोफेसर, 7 असिस्टेंट प्रोफेसर, 3 सीनियर रेजिडेंट, एंड वी हैव 54 PG residents today, but we have 24 seats per year. So this is the first year, but after 2 years we have 24 into 372 residents plus faculty members. So सब मिलाकर we will have department of more than 100 people. And at this time we have the second highest department as far as concerned of the PG. और MBBS students की देखा जाए तो we teach MBBS, we teach physiotherapy, we teach BDS, nursing, etc. All these things, and PG, super specialties are there. Faculty profile, I being the oldest, as a head of department, and we are privileged that Dr. Jaiswal is also senior professor and medical director. He is from our department and he has a very vast experience of surgery as well as in administration. Other faculty members, senior Dr. Lakshman Agarwal, Dr. Rajkumar Kanoja, Dr. Shirish Gupta, Dr. Brajesh Sharma, Dr. Kochar, Dr. Saurabh Chhabra Kapoor, Dr. Neil Kamal Gupta, other professors. We have doing our services, giving our service since last 2025 years. Gradually, number is increasing in OPD as well as in IPD. In last 3 years data, we have 5,000 OPD, IPD, and 15,000 OPD. Last year in 23, 17,000. Now in 24, it's about 20,000. और इन 25 में अभी अगस्त तक का डाटा जो है 12,000 से ज़्यादा हमारे ओपीडी है और 4,800 सर्जरी वी हैव ऑलरेडी परफॉर्म। सॉरी, सर्जरी IPD. The most common procedure, as we all know in general surgery, is cholecystectomy. Laparoscopic cholecystectomy has given this boost to the Department of General Surgery. We have super specialty clinics and various subspecialties and super specialty. Weekly, we have diabetic clinic for diabetic report, we have breast clinic, we have Dr. Saroj is running, bariatric clinic, myself is running weekly, hernia clinic, varicose veins clinic and plastic surgery clinic, surgical gastroenterology clinic, and then pediatric surgery clinic also in Department of General Surgery other than the super specialty department. I talked to Dr. Nijawan sir also. Last week मैंने कहा था सर एंडोस्कोपी के अंदर काफी सर्जरी के रेजिडेंट्स का एक्सपोजर होना चाहिए, क्योंकि यार कन्वर्सन और हमारे रेजिडेंट को हमने सर ने भी बोला था कि 1 महीने के लिए हम रोटेशन पे भेजेंगे, तो एक एंडोस्कोपी की एटलीस्ट बेसिक नॉलेज जो है पता नहीं चलेगी। इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चर, वी हैव ए स्टेट ऑफ आर्ट OPD services, telemedicine consultation, where we give consultation on telemedicine. Wards, we have already 240 wards in 6 units. Total male surgical के अंदर we have 130 beds, female surgical we have 75 beds, and post-operative ward 20 beds, and surgical ICU beds are about 15 beds. So total 240 beds in Department of General. Modular OT complex, state-of-art laparoscopy theater is available, state-of-art laparoscopy instrument is available. We have all type of laparoscopy instrument with infrared, 3D, 2D, stall, striker, with harmonic scalpel, with everything we have, which is required for any type of advanced laparoscopy. Robotic surgery, we have ultra modern Da Vinci robot. Although, to be very honest, and we are in the struggling phase, or we are in the very early phase of robotic surgery. But I will assure that before next year, we will do something good in field of robotic surgery also. Learning resources by Wi-Fi campus, demonstration room, seminar room, lecture theatre. We have projector, we have LCD display, we have well-equipped 300 plus library in our department and audiovisual aid. Departmental museum is separate. Academics, we have a rotation posting for our PGs in various specialty departments like neurosurgery, gastrointestinal surgery, oncosurgery, plastic surgery, cardiovascular surgery, neurosurgery, and surgical ICU. Hands-on surgical training on mannequins, on simulators, on patients, on animals. यहाँ पर भी जैसा मौका मिलता है, अपने स्टूडेंट्स को, रेजिडेंट्स को hands-on training देने का भी रखता है. Department of General Surgery, besides the teaching and bottom, we have skill lab, mentorship, guidance, we have general clerk, periodic internal assessment. Every month के अंदर अगर हम हर बच्चे का जो पीजी करने आता है, तो अगर 36 नहीं हो जाते तो 30 प्लस अगर पीजी असेसमेंट होती है तो ऑलमोस्ट थ्योरी पेपर यू कैन से कि 30 पेपर के अंदर जो पूछा जाता है उसके बाहर से पेपर नहीं आता है. अभी लास्ट ईयर पेपर को 90% पेपर थे, उन्हीं क्वेश्चन में से आते हैं जो हम बच्चों को. Interdisciplinary learning with UGCR as our department is a major department like medicine and surgery. So we are involved in all academic activity of hospital like UGCR, PGCR, CCR, CCR, and our faculty and our residents attend regularly this type of academic activities. Monthly CME is our very important and initiative taken by our department only. As we have started a 100-hour CME from Rajasthan Medical Council, and we have already 17 to 80 CME already done on the various topics like pain abdomen, hernia, ventral hernias, cholecystectomy, CVD injury, wound healing, now fluid balance, EMR, EPR, so many things we have. Full day CME होती है, जिसके अंदर all delegates will get 2 credit hours and all faculty members will get 3 credit hours. तो 3 साल की पीजी के अंदर अगर वो 30 CME को अटेंड करके जाता है तो 60 क्रेडिट्स आप उसके पास ऑलरेडी पीजी के दौरान होंगे. और कोई फैकल्टी अगर हमारे साथ 3 साल रहती है तो उसके बाद 3 साल के अंदर 50% क्रेडिट आवर्स होंगे. Our department, other departments are also following our this concept of departmental CME on a single term. List of CME held recently, monthly CME and workshop, we have already doing it regularly. Research and publication, since 2009, we have 92 PG students who have passed out, so 92 thesis उनकी लिखी गई. 54 students which are presently in our department are also writing their thesis. More than 150 publications by faculty and senior residents and residents are published in PubMed, Scopus, Web Science, etc. Our department faculty has chapters in various journals. Our guest lecture. This is again a very important feature of our department, and we have conducted at least 20 plus guest lecture from the various faculty of Jaipur and outside. This is Dr. Ajay Sharma, transplant surgeon from UK, Dr. Chawla, Dr. S.S. Sharma Sahab, Dr. Rajesh Katawa, Dr. Prashant Lavania. Our department has received a national award by central government for doing maximum number of surgery in Department of General Surgery by central government. Central government जो जनरिक सुरक्षा योजना जिसको राजस्थान के अंदर भामाशाह के नाम से उसके अंदर मनसुख मांडविया साहब की वीडियो कॉन्फ्रेंसिंग के प्रेजेंस के अंदर they have given, and this is the only department in all over India जनरल सर्जरी डिपार्टमेंट, जहाँ पर आपको मैक्सिमम नंबर ऑफ सर्जरी करनी है। Department achievement and awards, we have received various awards from various national, international and state level conferences. Our resident, our faculty, our President Dr. Paresh has international travel grant also given by the Japanese Surgical Society. Extension of outreach activities, we have organized various medical camps in Jaipur, outside in Jaipur. Celebration of national and international days, we have celebrated in our department Doctors' Day, Father's Day, National Cancer Survivor Day, World Environment Day, World Bicycle Day, Teachers' Day, World No Tobacco Day, World Blood Donor Day, International Nursing Day, Mother's Day, World Hypertension Day. छोटी चीज़ अब है ना, जब चालू किया वर्ल्ड हाइपरटेंशन डे पे somebody told me कि क्या करें, केक कटिंग करें, कि समोसा मंगाएं, कि कचौड़ी मंगाएं। मैं क्या सबसे पहले काम करते हैं, सारे अपने फैकल्टी एंड सारे रिजल्ट को ब्लड प्रेशर चेक करते हैं। मोस्ट सिंपल एंड मोस्ट है ना, अपने खुद का तो देखें कम से कम अपन कहाँ पर है। पता लगा उस टाइम इवन अवर रेजिडेंट वाज ओनली 26-27 ईयर, उनमें से 2 या 3 के हाइपरटेंशन के साथ आए फैकल्टी में। तो सबसे पहले चैरिटी है ना, स्टार्ट विद आवर ओन। तो हमने वर्ल्ड हाइपरटेंशन डे पे सबसे पहले सारी फैकल्टी और सारे रेजिडेंट इंक्लूडेड इन्वॉल्व हुए, सबका ब्लड प्रेशर चेक किया, जिन लोगों को जरूरत थी तो उनको डॉक्टर की बात डिस्कस की। तो curricular activities like sports, cricket, football, etc. games, our residents and our team are playing. Cultural activities, we have participated in fashion show, best living party, Diwali celebrations, welcome party for juniors, farewell party for seniors, celebration of faculty achievements, Diwali celebration, they are all our thing. And this cultural day are not just about fun and color. They are about the connection. In the laughter and performance, we build the bond, making sure we shine not just in stage but in life. तो एक बड़ी बॉन्डिंग जो है आपस की बड़ी इंपॉर्टेंट है। इट्स लाइक फैमिली बॉन्डिंग। फैमिली के अंदर इस तरह से होता है कि आपके पीछे एक सपोर्ट है, आपके फादर आपके पीछे खड़े तो यू कैन डू एनीथिंग। तो हमारी इस तरह से बॉन्डिंग है, उस तरह से कोशिश है कि आपके फैकल्टी आपके पीछे खड़ी है, यू गो अहेड, वी आर हियर। डिपार्टमेंट ऑफ जनरल सर्जरी मिशन established like a very best department in all over India. It's like a permanent office फ्रंटो को कहा था मैंने, सर ये एटलीस्ट इस लेवल पे होने का बेटा अभी से शुरुआत है, अभी तो 25 साल में। इंस्टीट्यूट्स लेवल लाइक इंस्टीट्यूट्स की एज नहीं होती, इंडिविजुअल की एज होती है। आप और मैं रहेंगे नहीं रहेंगे तो इंस्टीट्यूट आज से 100 साल बाद भी रहेगा। इट्स लाइक ए स्मॉल छोटा पौधा है, पर एक वर्ष की तरह से आज से 100 साल बाद भी माता में दिस डिपार्टमेंट ऑफ सर्जरी इन आवर सेलिब्रेशन। और फादर यूज्ड टू से, बेटा जिंदगी में 2 या 3 प्रोफेशन है, वही सबसे अच्छे हो। फर्स्ट एक चिकित्सा का पेशा है जहाँ पर आप किसी की मदद करते हो किसी की जान बचाने की। दूसरा पेशा है आपके शिक्षक का, जहाँ पर आप किसी बच्चे को तैयार करते हो उसके फ्यूचर के लिए, है ना, कि वो आगे आके आपके लोगों को पढ़ेगा तो समाज का निर्माण करेगा। और तीसरी चीज़ है कि आप किसी आदमी को ऐसी स्किल सिखाते हो जिससे वो लाइफ लॉन्ग उसकी अर्निंग करें। आप इसको खाना खिलाओगे 8 घंटे बाद उसको कोई भूल गए। तो आई एम फॉर्चुनेट एनफ ड्यू टू महात्मा गांधी इंस्टीट्यूट, आई एम डूइंग ऑल दी 3 एक्टिविटीज एज डॉक्टर, एज सर्जन, वी आर ट्रीटिंग आवर पेशेंट, एज मेडिकल टीचर वी आर टीचिंग आवर यूजी स्टूडेंट एंड पीजी स्टूडेंट, और सबको स्किल सिखाने का तो सर्जिकल स्किल सिखाने से। Alumni progress, we have already 27 of our alumni in Department of Surgery are doing super specialty, and MCL doing MCL, DM, and various big courses. And lastly, my request and appeal to all the students, basically all students are who make the institute proud. कोई भी इंस्टीट्यूट प्राउड करता है अपने टीचर की तरह वजह से नहीं और अपनी फैकल्टी की वजह से नहीं। कोई भी अगर अपन पढ़ते हैं कि फलान स्कूल के अंदर से वो पढ़ के निकला है, वो मेयो कॉलेज से पढ़ के निकला है, वो कॉलेज से पढ़ के निकला है, उस तरह से जब आप जाके आगे आपके सब आप आगे जाके बड़ा काम करोगे। द्रोणाचार्य क्यों फेमस हुए? क्योंकि उनको अर्जुन जैसा शिष्य मिला। द्रोणाचार्य तो बाकी सबको भी सिखाया था, नकुल सहदेव को भी द्रोणाचार्य ने सिखाया था। रमाकांत आचार्य क्यों फेमस हुए? क्योंकि रमाकांत आचार्य को सचिन तेंदुलकर जैसा, रमाकांत आचार्य ने तो अपनी जिंदगी में 200-300 लोगों को क्रिकेट सिखाई, पर एक सचिन तेंदुलकर निकला। वी होप कि आपने सचिन तेंदुलकर निकलेगा तो अर्जुन निकलेगा। You will make us proud to our department, to our faculty, and to our. Thank you.
I'll just say one thing, Sanjay.
Sir.
You know, when Sanjay was talking, you could see an enthusiasm in him and a sense of ownership for not only the department but the institution and society. I think that sends a very nice message across for every department across, that that's the sort of ownership and enthusiasm we must have in progress. A lot of days. So I think surgery department में Mother's Day and Father's Day is the most important day, क्योंकि जितनी भी super specialization की surgical branches निकली आगे, आखिर माँ बाप तो वही है ना, यही भैया. So I think that's something which is very good in my life. Thank you so much.
Good morning to all the dignitaries, senior faculty members, and my dear friends. Today, I, Dr. Liktor Dhiman, Junior Resident from Department of General Surgery, under the guidance of Dr. Shirish Gupta, Professor and Unit Head, Department of General Surgery, I'm going to present a case of 35-year-old female with lump abdomen. A 35-year-old female, Hindu by religion, residing in Rajsamand, Rajasthan, was a homemaker by occupation. She had been educated up to the class of 10th standard. She belongs to lower middle socio-economic status, and she presented to the surgery department with chief complaints of lump in the left upper abdomen since the past 10 years, pain in the left upper abdomen since the past 8 years, and generalized weakness since the past 8 years. Patient was apparently asymptomatic 10 years ago when she incidentally found to have a lump in the left upper abdomen on a routine antenatal checkup. It was gradually progressive, initially of a cricket ball size, which increased 3 times to its present size. Patient also complains of pain in the left upper abdomen since the past 8 years. It was insidious in onset, gradually progressive in nature, dull aching. It was aggravated on prolonged standing or working for longer hours, and it was relieved on lying down and taking rest. There was no radiating, shifting, or effort pain. Patient also complains of generalized weakness, which was off and on since the past 8 years. The patient was usually lethargic, used to get exhausted while doing her daily chores, and experienced dizziness with postural change. Patient also took some nutrition and iron supplements off and on to combat her weakness, and gives the history of multiple blood transfusions 4 to 5 times at least since the past 4 years. She gives us no history of fever with chills, night sweats, hematemesis, bleeding per rectum, melena, hematuria, abnormal uterine bleeding, jaundice, dyspnea, palpitation, altered sodium, fainting, weight loss or anorexia. She also gives us no complaint of burning with chulation. Her past history was not significant, and she gives us no similar complaints in the family. She is a vegetarian by diet, has normal sleep, normal bowel, and normal bladder habits. She is a non-alcoholic and non-smoker. She achieved menarche at the age of 15. She was married at the age of 23. Her score is parity 1, live 1, abortion 0. She gives us the history of a full-term normal vaginal delivery in 2015. Her menstrual cycles lasted from 3 to 5 days, could be 32 days. Her flow was normal. So to summarize the history of the patient, we have a 35-year-old female with lump in her left upper abdomen, gradually increasing in size, and it is also associated with pain and generalized weakness, which was off and on since the past 10 years. And she also gives us the history of taking multiple nutritional supplements and multiple blood transfusions. So a question to the audience, what according to you would be the organs involved in the left upper quadrant that could lead to such a big swelling? Yes. Weight of pancreas, splenic flexure, then left kidney, left supra-abdominal gland, and thank you. Correctly said so. The left upper quadrant involves liver, left adrenal gland, stomach, left kidney, spleen, transverse colon, and a few loops of small intestine. So to begin with, the first organ in question is spleen. Here, the few pathologies that could lead to the lump is massive splenomegaly, splenic cyst, splenic mass. Moving on to left kidney, it could, the renal mass, polycystic kidney disease, hydronephrosis could be a reason why we see a lump in the left upper quadrant. In GI tract, we have GIST, carcinoma splenic flexure, carcinoma stomach. In tail of pancreas, we could pseudocyst could lead to a lump. A left adrenal mass or a retroperitoneal tumor like liposarcoma, or an abdominal wall mass could also lead to such a lump in left upper body. We further examined the patient. First, we asked for proper consent and we examined the patient in a well-lit room with a female staff. The patient was conscious and well-oriented to time, place and person. Her height is 163 centimeter, weight is 57 kg and BMI 21.45 kg per meter square. The patient had pallor, whereas icterus, clubbing, cyanosis, generalized lymphadenopathy and peripheral edema were absent. Her blood pressure is 120 by 70 millimeters of mercury, pulse is 96 beats per minute, respiratory rate is 13 cycles per minute, her oxygen saturation is 96% at room air, and her temperature was calculated to be 36.9 degrees centigrade. On inspection of the abdomen, patient was exposed from nipples to mid-thigh in supine position with her hands by the side. Her umbilicus was found to be inverted and central. Swelling was seen occupying the epigastrium, left hypochondrium, left lumbar and umbilical region. The swelling moved downwards with inspiration. Striae marks were present over the lower abdomen. There were no visible peristalsis, pulsation, dilated visible veins, or visible scars. No hyper or hypopigmentation was seen. External hernial orifices were found to be normal. On palpation of the abdomen, there was no local rise of temperature. Abdomen was soft, no guarding, no rigidity. Spleen was palpable in left hypochondrium, epigastrium, left lumbar and umbilical region crossing the midline. The swelling was approximately 20 cm below the costal margin in left mid-clavicular line and 22 cm in width from mid-axillary line to 3 cm beyond the midline. It was firm in consistency, had smooth surface, splenic notch was palpable, fingers could not be insinuated between the lump and the costal margin. Lower margin was well defined and regular. The downward movement of swelling was here confirmed. We performed Carnett's test on the patient and lump becomes less prominent here. The swelling was non-pulsatile, non-pollutable and no fullness of renal angle was found. On further percussion of the abdomen, uniform dull note was percussed over the swelling. Liver dullness was present from fifth intercostal space to costal margin in the right mid-axillary line. Fluid thrill and shifting dullness was absent. On auscultation, bowel sounds were found to be present and normal. No bruit was heard over the swelling. Digital rectal examination. No external abnormalities were present. Normal anal tone, fecal stain was present, blood stain was absent. No ballooning was felt. On proctoscopy, we found it to be normal and no hemorrhoids were seen. On systemic examination, cardiovascular system, S1, S2 was heard and no murmurs were heard. On central nervous system, no focal neural deficits were seen. Observed, GCS was 15 by 15. Respiratory system, bilateral air entry was present and equal. No added sounds were heard. So, after examining the patient and taking a thorough history, we could come down to the provisional diagnosis of splenomegaly, which was belonging to the grade 4 of Hackett's classification with anemia. So, to further take the patient, we got some preliminary investigations done. We got some hematological and radiological tests done. We got her CBC done where we found hemoglobin to be low, TLC to be low, and platelets to be low, whereas her liver function test was completely normal. On her ultrasonography of whole abdomen, altered ecotexture of liver was seen. The portal vein was dilated to 24.7 mm. The collaterals were dilated in perigastric and bare area of liver. Gross splenomegaly was found, that was approximately 34 centimeter. Dilated tortuous splenic vein, 17.7 mm was also seen. On triple phase CECT of the whole abdomen, altered liver attenuation was confirmed. The main portal vein, its divisions, right and left branch, were all found to be dilated. That was approximately around 22.6 mm, which was suggestive of non-cirrhotic portal fibrosis. Massive splenomegaly was seen, dilated and tortuous splenic vein, and splenic infarcts were observed. Multiple venous collaterals in the epigastric vessels were seen, whereas the rest of the organs were found to be normal. So after getting the preliminary investigations done, an examination done, and a thorough history of the patient, we could come down to the provisional diagnosis of splenomegaly, where the cause still has to be ascertained. And the notable points were found to be that we found the portal vein to be dilated, and we found pancytopenia. So for this, we sought an opinion of clinical hematology and medical gastroenterology department. So here, I would like to call Dr. Pragya Sharma from Department of Medical Gastroenterology to take this case further. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Digjo. Good morning, everyone. I am Dr. Pragya Sharma, Senior Resident from the Department of Medical Gastroenterology. We have been referred a case of a 35-year-old female with splenomegaly and dilated portal vein by the Department of General Surgery, and I will be taking you through the case forward. So let us first have a look at splenomegaly. Splenomegaly does not have a consensus definition because the spleen size varies with age, size as well as ethnicity. But in general, we say that the spleen has enlarged when it is up to 2 times its normal size, or when the splenic size extends to beyond 10 centimeters. And massive splenomegaly is said to have occurred when the spleen size goes beyond 20 centimeters. Clinically, we use the age-old Hackett's classification system, and in our case, as mentioned previously, the spleen fell into Hackett's grade 4. So there are numerous causes of splenomegaly which can be categorized as follows: congestive, infiltrative, infectious and tropical, autoimmune and inflammatory, and hematologic causes. So based on the clinical presentation and the radiological evaluation done till now, where we have an enlarged spleen and also we have a dilated portal vein and a dilated splenic vein, congestive cause of splenomegaly appears to be the most likely. Here's another simplified version of how to approach a patient with splenomegaly. We do routine investigations that include complete blood picture, peripheral blood smear, erythrocyte sedimentation rate, C-reactive protein, and lactate dehydrogenase levels, which give us a preliminary clue to whether there is any hematologic or rheumatologic cause. And we do an ultrasound abdomen, which confirms the size of the spleen and splenomegaly, and also gives this feature which indicate portal hypertension, which is so in our case. So now let's have a look at the portal vein and portal hypertension. Portal vein is formed by the confluence of the splenic vein and the superior mesenteric vein behind the neck of the pancreas. The portal venous system carries blood towards the liver from the esophagus, stomach, small and large intestines, pancreas, gallbladder, and spleen. Portal hypertension is a clinical syndrome which is defined by an increase in the hepatic sinusoidal pressure to 6 millimeters or more. Why portal hypertension is so important to us as a clinician is because, irrespective of the cause, it has got its own set of implications, which include formation of portosystemic collaterals, which is basically to decompress the hypertension, and subsequent risk of bleeding, which can range from mild to massive life-threatening bleeds, congestive splenomegaly, and ascites. So, we usually equate portal hypertension to liver cirrhosis, but it's only one of the many causes of portal hypertension as depicted by this slide. So broadly, we can classify the causes of portal hypertension based on the site of resistance into post-hepatic, which is beyond the liver, intrahepatic, within the liver, and pre-hepatic, which is before the portal vein enters into the liver. Now, in the post-hepatic causes of portal hypertension, alongside finding a dilated portal vein, we also find a dilated IVC, inferior vena cava. The preliminary investigations provided to us were suggestive of a normal IVC, so post-hepatic causes appear to be less likely. So now we are left with intrahepatic causes, which can further be divided into pre-sinusoidal, sinusoidal, and post-sinusoidal, and we are left with pre-hepatic causes. Now, to evaluate further, we advise for a GI endoscopy, a Doppler ultrasound of the splenoportal axis, and fibroscan. So let us have a look into these investigations. The USG abdomen with a portal vein Doppler was suggestive of features of portal hypertension. The portal vein was dilated to 24 millimeters. There was presence of portosystemic collateral vessels. Hepatofugal flow was noted in the portal vein. There was absence of respiratory variations in the splenic and the mesenteric veins, and there was an evident splenomegaly. See here, we can essentially rule out the prehepatic causes. Those would give us features of thrombosis or capilloma formation, which are absent in this case. Next, an upper GI endoscopy was performed, and this was suggestive of grade 1 esophageal varices, suggesting the presence of portal hypertension and its way to becoming clinically significant. We also got a liver fibroscan done. The cap value, that is control attenuation parameter, was 230 decibels per meter, and the median stiffness was 6.4 kilopascals, which fell in the normal limits. So this essentially rules out our post-sinusoidal and sinusoidal causes of intrahepatic portal hypertension. So now we're left with the pre-sinusoidal causes that would include a primary biliary cirrhosis, sarcoidosis, schistosomiasis, and non-cirrhotic portal fibrosis. The clinical syndrome very much did not favor primary biliary cirrhosis or schistosomiasis, and hence we are left with the most likely diagnosis of non-cirrhotic portal fibrosis. So this is the criteria for non-cirrhotic portal fibrosis, or NCPF as we commonly call it, by the Asian Pacific Association for the Study of the Liver. So the first criteria is the presence of moderate to massive splenomegaly. In our case, the spleen was up to 34 centimeters. Evidence of portal hypertension, varices and or collaterals. We have evidence of everything in our case. A patent splenoportal axis and hepatic veins on ultrasound doctor. We have a confirmation for this as well. Test results indicating normal or near normal liver function. We also have a normal liver function in our case. A near normal or a normal HEPG and liver histology with no evidence of cirrhosis or parenchymal injury. Now the last two investigations are invasive investigations, and since our clinical syndrome was very much favoring non-cirrhotic portal fibrosis based on all the evidences that we have, we did not consider going for the invasive tests. So in conclusion, the most likely diagnosis for the case in discussion is non-cirrhotic portal hypertension with splenomegaly because of congestion caused by the portal hypertension and pancytopenia. Features which are favoring this diagnosis include portal hypertension, presence of massive splenomegaly with hypersplenism, preserved liver functions, a patent splenoportal axis and hepatic veins on ultrasound doctor. So how do we manage a case of non-cirrhotic portal fibrosis? First is control and management of varicose bleeding. So here, the upper GI endoscopy was suggestive of small esophageal varices which do not need an interventional management. And the second one is surgical shunt surgeries. Surgical shunt surgeries are usually considered when there is presence of symptomatic hypersplenism, symptomatic splenomegaly in the form of pain, infarction or restriction of daily activities of living, and a poor health-related quality of life. So these features were satisfied by our patient, and hence we referred the patient back to general surgery for planning operative management. Also, because pancytopenia as a clinical feature required a little more investigation, we also referred the patient to Department of Clinical Hematology for pancytopenia. So now I would like to invite Dr. Vijeta Niranjan, Senior Resident from the Department of Clinical Hematology, to take you through the case further.
What was the kind of anemia? Patient had severe anemia, was that characterized in the workup?
So we have Dr. Vijeta for this.
That's not part of your yes, probably people normally work this up.
So we did work it up, but we also referred the patient to him.
And portal hypertension is present.
Yes, sir.
But a person who has had a splenomegaly for 10 years, has a massive splenomegaly and a massive dilatation of the portal vein, don't you think that the size of the varices is not really consistent with such long-standing portal hypertension? Normally NCPA presents either with bleeding or with large varices and the rest of this presentation, and that is why your first emphasis was on management of GI bleeding in NCPA. Here you have a patient who has a massive splenomegaly for a long time and grade 1 varices. So what do you think is the reason for this
So
discrepancy?
that is the one of the common presentations where we have a well-tolerated bleed. In this case, we have
Small varices is the question. Why are the varices so small when the portal hypertension is so significant?
So there's evidence of collateral vessels in the CT scan elsewhere in the bare area of the liver as well. So that would be one of the reasons why if the collaterals open up from there, then we don't have the esophageal varices. Although esophageal varices are the most common place where photosystemic collaterals happen, it can happen elsewhere as well. So that would be one of the likely causes.
Demonstrate those. You mentioned paraumbilical varices were present, but other areas are not specified. Finally, would you like to say a word on what is the cause of portal hypertension here? This is pre-sinusoidal.
Yes.
It is not schistosomiasis or PBC or one of those common causes. What is the reason for portal hypertension in this patient?
So we are considering non-cirrhotic portal fibrosis because of clinical syndrome where the massive splenomegaly, which is disproportionate to the
I am
amount
not
of
questioning
portal
the impression of NCPF.
Yes.
Many other names also used for this entity. But where is the site of portal hypertension? The whole basis is the development of portal hypertension followed by a congestive splenomegaly and the other consequences. So why does the portal hypertension develop in NCPF?
So there is evidence of thrombosis in the medium and the small vessels entering the liver from the portal vein, the branches of the portal vein, second and third degree branches. And also there is pathology of phlebosclerosis, that is sclerosis around the pre-sinusoidal intrahepatic radicals of the portal vein. That is the site from where the portal hypertension begins and eventually it progresses further. It might even in a very later stage manifest with some degree of differential atrophy in the liver where even the perisinusoidal spaces are involved.
Actually, this patient had an ultrasound which showed dilated portal venous system till the liver, and the liver function test, fibroscan, everything was normal as far as liver function is concerned. Ideally, in ultrasound, you can see hyperechogenicity of the smaller portal vein branches, which could not be seen in this. So, indirectly, everything suggests it's a non-cirrhotic portal hypertension. As far as etiology is concerned, it is of the idiopathic variety, which used to be very common few decades ago. Nowadays, we see less number of cases of idiopathic NCPF.
That was the etiology. As far as the mechanics are concerned, the pressure in the portal system rises because of two reasons. Either there is increased flow or there is increased resistance to flow. With the Hackett's fork splenomegaly, there is increased flow as well as resistance to flow, as evidenced by the hepatofugal correction in the ultrasound. These are the things which are contributing to the development of portal.
Thank you. I would now like to invite Dr. Vijeta Niranjan from Department of Clinical Hematology to continue through the case. Thank you, Dr. Petra. I am Dr. Vijeta Niranjan, Senior Resident, Department of Clinical Hematology. So I will be taking this case forward. This case of 35-year-old female with massive splenomegaly, non-cirrhotic portal hypertension, and pancytopenia was referred to us for further evaluation. We recapitulate the hemogram. That hemoglobin showed 7.2 gram per deciliter, the TLC of 700 per microliter, and the platelet counts were 35,000 per microliter. That is, the hemogram showed the presence of pancytopenia with a corrected retic count of 1.8%. The LDH was raised of around 639 units per liter, while the LFTs were normal in this case. We further advised for the peripheral blood film that showed RBC predominantly of normocytic normochromic with mild anisocoaglocytosis and the occasional presence of teardrop cells, polychromasia, and no nucleated RBC seen. The WBC counts were reduced on the number and the DLC showed the neutropenia. The platelet counts was also reduced on the smear. On the peripheral blood film, there was no any left shift, no leukoerythroblastic picture, no leukocytosis, rather cytopenias was there. On the peripheral blood film, there was no any abnormal cells found and no any hemoparasites were found. We further advised for the bone marrow examination. The bone marrow aspiration showed the cellular smear with the erythroid hyperplasia and the reversal of MA ratio to 1:4. The normal is 4:1. While the myeloid, these all are the erythroid hyperplasia. While the myeloids and the megakaryocyte series were within normal limit, and there was no any abnormal cell found on the bone marrow aspiration. The bone marrow biopsy showed the overall cellularity of around 70 to 80%, which was hypercellular for the age, and the erythroid series showed the erythroid hyperplasia, while the myeloids and the megakaryocyte lineage showed normal sequential maturation, and there was no any abnormal cells, granulomas, or aggregates found on the bone marrow biopsy. So the impression from the bone marrow study was the hypercellular marrow showing erythroid hyperplasia and no abnormal cell. The history, the clinical examinations, and the findings from the peripheral blood film and the bone marrow study examination were highly suggestive of hypersplenism. So there are certain criteria to define hypersplenism. These include the splenomegaly, cytopenias in more than 2 cell lines, normal or hyperplastic bone marrow, and the hematological response to splenectomy. Out of these 4 criteria, the initial 3 criteria were fulfilled in this case. So we concluded this case as hypersplenism due to splenomegaly, which is secondary to non-cirrhotic portal fibrosis.
What would be the indication for splenectomy in a patient with pancytopenia? Only cytologic abnormalities or clinical manifestations of cytopenias?
So when there is excessive destructions of this red blood cell due to splenomegaly, when there is any excessive bleeding due to the destructions of this platelets, RBCs, and so these are the main indications.
We do not have any major bleeding. We do not have infections despite the neutropenia. Numbers are alarming, I agree. So do you think that is
there is
sufficient or there are other reasons for splenectomy?
Yes. So there are persistent pancytopenia in this case that requires multiple blood transfusion. In this case, so we have advised for further splenectomy, and also in the criteria of this hypersplenism, the last point is hematological response after this splenectomy.
Initially, she had fatigability
Fatigability
as a
and
symptom.
multiple transfusions.
Yeah, anemia. Yeah.
This was iron deficiency was present or not. Not the smear doesn't suggest, but serum iron TIVC would have been and transparent saturation would have seen whether correction of with parenteral iron could have corrected the anemia and the fatigability.
But
That
she
hasn't been
already
done.
received multiple nutrition supplements in this case.
Adequate, has they been normal levels been achieved or not? Simply receiving is not enough. Did had levels been normalized? That I think measuring levels would have helped. That if optimum management is done, yet things are not improving. That's the case for us.
Yeah, but there's no history of obvious bleed. And nutritionally, she was all right. So it appears that it could all be because splenomegaly. But ideally, there should be objective evidence to see whether there was varicose.
Sir, the patient actually came to us with a complaint of a lump with pain, residual aching pain. She is not able to do the daily chores and she has undergone multiple blood transfusions. Still, she is having the same symptoms of lethargy, fatigue, not able to do day-to-day activities, and has a continuous pain. So these things are not going to improve by any iron supplements or nutrition supplement, which she has already been taking for the last 9 years. But
Platelet count is also very low. This is 32,000, 30,000.
Normally, counts do not indicate the need for intervention. It is complications of the low count. Are there petechial rashes? Are there bleeding? Are there recurrent infections with gastroenterologisms that happens in neutropenic patients? Then you have very strong indication for this.
So-
Otherwise, what you were saying, sir, that there is a dragging pain and discomfort. So that is a clear indication if nothing else is happening. Other symptoms persisting might well indicate inadequate correction. Despite years of correction, it will still be inadequate. That's
Is-
what I'm trying to point out.
At the same time, the anemia is normocytic normochromic type. So that practically rules out the iron coexisting iron deficiency.
Not necessarily. I think it would be much better to actually test for the iron levels.
Just to brief to all the residents, whenever you have a patient with hypersplenism, there are 2 types of hypersplenism which are present. One is a biochemical hypersplenism, second is a symptomatic hypersplenism. So what Dr. Saraswat wants to emphasize is biochemical hypersplenism does not indicate surgery. I think that's clear now. Only if the what Now what Dr. Nijaman has emphasized is the patient had symptoms. What Dr. Shirisha said is she had symptoms. So the answer would have been the patient has a symptomatic hypersplenism that indicated symptom. For the resident level, is it clear now? Fine, thanks.
From the exam point of view, if the examiner is still not satisfied, then you can say the patient wants to go for kickboxing.
So transfer this case back to Department of General Surgery for further management. Now I would like to invite Dr. Somil Goyal to take this case forward. Thank you.
Morning to all. My name is Dr. Somil Goyal, women resident from Department of General Surgery. I would like to take this case further. So, after taking all into consideration history, clinical examination, radiological investigations, as well as hematological and opinions from medical gastroenterology and clinical hematology, we have arrived to the conclusion. Now, what should we do for this patient? First, patient arrived to us with complaints of lump and pain over abdomen, for which patient has already taken multiple blood transfusions and off and on nutrition supplements. This lump will not go with any medical treatment. First of all, patient is also suffering from generalized weakness due to anemia, as we have come down to now. So, for which patient has also taken multiple nutrition supplements. We don't know whether they're adequate or not, but this disease will progress further. It won't go until unless splenectomy should be done. Patient also has portal hypertension, as patient doesn't have now any variceal bleeding or any hemorrhoids, but it will develop in future. And due to large spleen, patient is also prone for traumatic injury, which may be fatal anytime. And due to thrombocytopenia, any trivial injury may cause profuse bleeding. For which, after taking all into this consideration, the patient was advised for splenectomy with proximal splenorenal shunting. Now I would invite Dr. Hisnul Rahman to throw some light over different aspects of splenorenal shunting.
Thank you, Dr. Somin. Good morning all. I am Dr. Hisnul Rahman. I am a senior resident in Department of CTS. Today I am here to discuss on the aspect of splenorenal shunt. As we can see here, the splenorenal shunt itself suggests that there is three organs that are involved here. One is the spleen, one is the kidney, and another one is the liver. In this diagram, as we can see, the organs are mentioned here. So the splenorenal shunt is a surgery in which we shunt or bypass the splenoportal access to the systemic venous return, that is through the renal vein. The vein that we choose here is the left renal vein. So there are two different kind of surgeries that we perform here. One is the proximal shunt and then the other is the distal one. As we can see here, now in the proximal shunt, what we do, we divide the splenic vein and we excise out the spleen completely, and we then bypass that splenic vein into the renal vein. Whereas in the distal shunt, as we can see here, we keep the spleen intact and the splenic vein is bypassed to the left renal vein. So there is a difference between these two surgeries. The proximal renal shunt, the spleen is excised and sacrificed, whereas in the distal shunt, the spleen is preserved. The proximal shunt is a non-selective shunt, whereas the distal one is the selective one. So what is a selective and non-selective shunt? The non-selective shunt diverts all the flow from the short gastric as well as the left gastric and the portal vein into the renal vein, whereas in this distal shunt, only the splenic and the short gastric veins are usually diverted. And the proximal shunt is a little bit more challenging to do. We have to dig deep and dissect all the branch veins, whereas in the distal shunt, it is more easy to do and relatively less challenging. The indication that we have in this patient is the
It is the other way around.
Yes, sir.
It is the other way around. Proximal shunt is easier.
Proximal shunt is
Just go back on the slide.
yes, sir.
Already shown in the The distal shunt is more challenging.
Yes, the distal shunt we have to divide the veins more distally, and we have to ligate the small veins.
You said the other way around. Distal is easier and proximal is more challenging.
Okay, sir, I'm sorry for that. The distal is difficult. The indication of a proximal shunt in our patient was a non-cirrhotic portal hypertension and hypersplenism. The other indications are refractory variceal bleeding and portal bilirubin. There are some prerequisites for this surgery. For the first one is the patient should have a patent left renal vein, and there should be adequacy of the size. The renal vein should be more than 10 millimeters, and the splenic vein should be around more than 5 millimeters. And there should be a normal confluence between the left renal vein and the inferior vena cava. There are a few contraindications that we have to keep in mind. The first one is the retroaortic left renal vein, because in that cases the vein run below the aorta, so the drainage is hampered. If there is a bifid renal vein, there is a not very adequate size of renal vein that we get. If there is an absent kidney or there is ectopic kidney or any kind of renal pathologies that is involved. Now the advantage that we get in proximal shunt is that there is a relatively less bleeding rate, as well as it averts the large issues of the large spleen that we have in this patient. Also, it helps in averting the issues of ectopic varices as well as variceal bleeding and portal bilirubin. But there are disadvantages also, that this shunt is relatively have higher rate of thrombosis because the angulation is very sharp. There is post-spleen thrombocytosis as well as post-splenectomy sepsis, and there is a higher chance of hepatic encephalopathy. Saying so, now I want Dr. Shomil to continue with the case. So, after planning and all the decision making, the patient was admitted and preoperative investigations were done, pre-anesthetic change was done. After which patient was vaccinated 14 days prior to surgery with pneumococcal vaccine, Haemophilus influenza B vaccine and meningococcal conjugate vaccine. Blood investigations as we performed shows pancytopenia, other investigations were within normal limits. Preoperative management, patient was found to be anemic, hemoglobin was 6.5. Preoperative optimization was tried with 3 units of packed blood cells transfusion, but only slight improvement from 6.5 to 8.1 grams per deciliter hemoglobin was achieved. Now, surgery. Informed consents from patient and patient attenders were obtained. Injection subtraction 1 gram intravenously was administered 1 hour prior to surgery. General anesthesia was administered and surgery was commenced under the coverage of platelet counts to reduce the bleeding. After painting and draping with all aseptic precautions, midline incisions was given. Abdominal wall opened in layers. Large dilated, tortuous, paraumbilical veins were visualized, which were preserved. Massive spleen was visualized. Dilated vessels were seen entering the lower pole, excessively, lower pole of spleen, which were triple ligated and divided. Following which splenic hilum identified, dissected, and pancreatic tape was visualized, which was preserved. Gastrosplenic ligaments and linorenal ligaments were divided, including short gastric vessels using harmonic scalpel. After which splenic artery was identified, triple ligated and divided. Splenic vein was divided between clamps. After this, spleen was delivered out and sent for histopathological evaluation. After this, liver was also palpated, which showed a smooth surface, no nodularity, and a small piece was also taken for biopsy. After which, we called upon the help of cardiothoracic and vascular surgeons with the anastomosis. Left renal vein was identified, dissected, preserving left adrenal and gonadal veins. 5,000 international units of unfractionated heparin was administered intravenously. After which, bulldog clamps were applied on renal vein. End-to-side anastomosis of splenic vein with left renal vein done using propylene 60. Clamps were removed and checked for any anastomotic leak. After ensuring hemostasis, wound was closed. Approximated blood loss during surgery was 200 ml. Operating time 2.5 hours. Total packed red blood cells were transfused 2 units and platelet concentrates 8 units.
Patient was extubated post-operatively on table and shifted to ICU. 1 unit packed red blood cell was also transfused, after which, patient was shifted to ward on post-op day 1. Post-op recovery was uneventful and patient was discharged on post-op day 5. Complete blood counts were sent serially, which showed serial increase in platelets and leukocytosis till post-op day 2, and which then normalized. Biopsy report showed congested spleen with no abnormal cells, no granuloma, no caseous necrosis or ventricular cells, and liver specimen showed normal liver parenchyma. Advice on discharge. Patient was advised booster dose vaccination after 5 years for pneumococcal conjugate vaccine and meningococcal conjugate vaccine, and after 10 years for Haemophilus influenza B vaccine, and advised to attend medical gastroenterology OPD for the management of portal hypertension. Patient after 3 months was well, comfortable, with no fresh complaints, wound was healed. Following review of literature, we took help from Schlesinger and Fortran's gastrointestinal and liver diseases for portal hypertension and dry bleeding, and some articles called splenomegaly diagnosis and management in adults from and we took help from ESDAS. After 3 months, there was platelet counts were about 2.5 lakhs, and the hemoglobin was achieved about 10. Now I would like to call Dr. Shirish Gupta to give take on this.
Good morning, sir. Your body whispers before it screams. So we are still living in an era where the patients are very ignorant, and the irony is that they don't sought the help of a medical hospitals or professions for the early treatment of their diseases. That's why this patient came to us after 10 years with such a huge splenomegaly and having a lot of symptoms of splenomegaly. Had this patient came earlier, then definitely a distal splenoileal shunt or some other conservative methods would have been possible in this patient. But because they present so late, so we have to go for a radical surgical treatment of these patients. Ignoring symptoms doesn't make them go away. It only delays the diagnosis, complicates treatment, and worsens the outcome. We are also very thankful that we are working in such an institute where all the multidisciplinaries they are available, all the facilities and infrastructure is available, the investigation modalities they are available in this institute at one roof. So we are able to completely diagnose the patient, give them the proper treatment to the patient. And I am really thankful to the management for providing us such an environment. Here I would like to thank all the dignitaries and the management for this providing us this environment for treating the patient. I would also like to give a special thanks to the Department of Anesthesia. Without the help of them, we will not be able to perform such surgeries.